Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the only podcast. I'm your special guest host, Chris Vanini, here with you today. It's been a couple weeks since we did one of these with various work commitments coming up for different people, but at the last minute, we've got myself and Joe Toohey here to talk about MSU football, MSU basketball, and everything that's going on in the world of Michigan State sports, the Big Ten, and otherwise. I'm, as I said, Chris Vanini on Twitter, at Chris Vanini. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing well. This is my favorite part of the year. We got both football and basketball. So
Yeah, I'm not even in basketball mood yet. I'm still locked in on football.
I kind of wish I was, but
What's your Twitter handle? I don't remember off the top of my head.
it's Jobin, Jobin, the number 2 and the letter E.
Oh, is your name Jobin?
No, that was just a nickname after I Love You Man that some of my friends cooked up, and that's sort of the reason I started the Twitter in the first place. And
Good movie.
yeah,
Movie, I think.
um, yeah.
You're in Ann Arbor right now, and at most times because you live there. What's the atmosphere around there with the recent news about Brady Hoke's dismissal? What's the atmosphere in Ann Arbor right now?
I think it's mostly just sort of a sobering or sobered like acceptance of the situation more than anything. Nobody wanted Hoke's head for any reason, really. I think it was mostly just sort of, exactly what happened when they had like a riot, or not really a riot, but what you would call an Ann Arbor riot.
A little protest thing.
Right, exactly. And that's sort of how Ann Arbor feels to me. I think it's hopeful, which is a little on the sad side. I was enjoying the Schadenfreude over the last few weeks, but yeah, I mean, I don't know, nothing too crazy, really.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm in suburban Detroit here, and I haven't actually left my house for 4 or 5 days. Just working on coachingsearch.com and the craziness that is the coaching carousel season. So since about Thanksgiving, I haven't really done much of anything. I actually got pretty sick, but powered through all that. And over the Thanksgiving weekend, we saw MSU hold on to the legendary and nationally beloved Land Grant Trophy after the Spartans went to Penn State and came away with a 34-10 win. They apparently opened the game with a kickoff return for a touchdown, but almost nobody saw it because the broadcast hasn't switched over yet. But MSU was never really in too much trouble. They got some field goal drives early on, and in the third quarter kind of pulled away. Not a great offensive performance by any means, but never a game that was very close in doubt. Joe, when you look back at that Penn State game, what was kind of your general takeaways?
Well, I thought it was sort of solidifying for me the fact that this is the second best D'Antonio MSU edition, right? I think if you look back at 2010 in sort of that nail-biter of a game at Penn State, were dominant in terms of a performance. And I don't know, that's cool. I thought you said that the offense didn't look great, and that is true to a certain extent, but scoring 27 against that Penn State defense on the road I thought was pretty impressive. In the first half, they were kind of pinned back, which was a strange situation. It's unusual.
And they didn't help themselves out with putting Damian Terry back at the goal line either. For one
yeah, it's just so weird. I just don't understand like what the logic is, right? Like I get the Pennsylvania connection, but this has happened over the course of D'Antonio's tenure where it seems like in situations where he plays a backup, he uses the excuse that it's to build depth, but then if there isn't, even in a situation where Cousins was sort of banged up in 2010 and 2011 at various points, Andrew Maxwell got virtually zero run. And so I don't understand, like, it just seems like a false narrative to a certain extent, a pretty sharp false narrative, because I think that it makes sense to a certain extent, but it's just not consistent. So I don't know. What do you think about that Terry thing?
I mean, especially when you figure that if Cook did go down, Tyler O'Connor would be the one in the game, not Terry.
Right.
If it had been if it had been 34-10 late in the game, if it had been in the middle of the game with a decent lead, I just thought everything about the situation just came off so strange. Connor Cook had led the offense to 2 scoring drives in 2 drives. He had 2 drives, he had 2 scoring. They were only field goals, but they were scoring drives. And so it's a game, it's 13-0 probably at the time.
Yeah.
And he must have been feeling comfortable, but to put Terry in the situation at the goal line, I don't know how beneficial that is to him, period, for his confidence, if you assume that the odds of moving anywhere on that drive were any high at all, which I don't think you can. If it had started at midfield, I would have been a little more understanding, I think. To me, the biggest part was the fact that you were backed up there at the goal line and a tough place to play against a top D. There's throwing him into the fire, and then there's throwing him into, a volcano. And I thought that it was an interesting move because after that, the offense stalled for quite a bit for the rest of the half. They never got going again. They did get right back in that same spot at the goal line with Cook and didn't go anywhere. But I thought it might have messed with some, I don't want to use the word momentum, but some good vibes that the offense had through 2 drives. I think playing Terry kind of messed with that a bit in that situation, and you couldn't have expected him to. In the pass that they did throw with him was that out pass, which is a staple of the MSU offense, but it's a pass that Terry has not yet proven that he can hit because he doesn't have the arm strength that he didn't in the spring game. He didn't when he played earlier in the game. And to just that, I thought that was a really difficult situation for Terry to be in. I was really surprised that they went with that.
I would agree with that. I think that the environment, to a certain extent, might be not. Penn State didn't hit 100,000 people at that game.
No, I think they hadn't. I think it listed 99, but I'm sure that was a exaggeration too.
Yeah, a little bit of a fudge on that one. So in terms of the environment, I don't know if it was the situation of it itself was quite odd, yeah. But to me, I'd just like to have some sort of consistent, and I think it would be good for the quarterbacks in the system too, right? To have some sort of expectation. Hey, I'm going to get in a game at this point for these reasons. Like, I'm going to see this. And that didn't happen. I mean, if you're Tyler O'Connor and you're looking at that, like, okay, they brought Damian in during this Penn State game. How come I didn't get more run against, say, Rutgers at home? When Connor Cook was still in the game, when MSU was up 35-3, like, to me it just seems, I don't know. There's a lot happening on the field, and that seemed to be D'Antonio's excuse for not using Nick Hill. But at the same time, it just seems like some consistency would be good for the guys developing too, just to have some expectation of how much time they're going to play and when.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the nitpicky points on our end in a win that was otherwise, like I said, pretty comfortable. Jeremy Langford, 30 carries, 118 yards, only 3.9 yards per carry. But early on in that game, he really was getting some holes. I thought the offensive line played really well because this is a Penn State defense that is #1 nationally in rush defense. And the fact that they were able to consistently early on get those holes, make some nice blocks, was a encouraging sign for all. And Jeremy Langford ends his career with, I believe it was 16 straight games with at least 100 yards against Big Ten opponents, which is pretty remarkable. That's out of what, 8 and 8? That's out of 17 total games, other than the Iowa game was the first Big Ten game. So of all the games, he was the top back. There was only one Big Ten game. Of all the Big Ten games, there was only one that he didn't get 100 yards, which is quite something to put on your resume there. I think he may go down as one of the most underrated players in MSU history. Especially, he only earned Big Ten honorable mention because of how many great running backs are in this league. And he never really got the credit I think he was due for just being an incredibly solid and well-rounded running back.
Absolutely. I think he'll be remembered well for the final touchdowns in a lot of those games in that
Mhm.
Rose Bowl run last year. But yeah, overall, I mean, that team will probably be remembered for the defense. And yeah, his transformation going into that 2013 season where there was basically no idea about who was going to be that feature back, and he just really took it on was amazing. Um, yeah, it's amazing too that there are four better backs than him in the Big Ten, right?
The,
Is there
the,
any other
three,
league
the,
that has like anything even remotely close?
the three candidates for the Doak Walker Award for the best running back were all in the Big Ten, which is remarkable. I think it was Coleman, Gordon, and
Abdullah.
Abdullah. Yeah, back
Yeah,
in
that makes sense.
nationally. So that's it's a credit to. I know the quarterbacks in the league aren't all that great, but those are some, along with David Cobb at Wisconsin, Minnesota, some very, very skilled running backs in this league. And Langford, again, he came in as a guy who was known for his speed. They wanted to get him on the field in some form because of how fast he was. I remember he had a fumble return for a touchdown in 2011, I want to say. He played receiver, defensive back, running back, and really took charge early last season. One of those out of nowhere players. I think he's going to have a real good chance to stick or at least get a shot in the NFL because he can do everything. He's got power, he's got speed, he's got vision. He fouls his blocks well, he can catch the ball, and he's really good in pass protection. And that's something that a lot of running backs that make a jump to the NFL are not good at.
Right, and I would say he protects the ball well too. I mean, it was very rare to see him cough one up, really at any point. So that's exciting. The other thing about what I think you were hinting at there, especially with the beginning of this Penn State game, is the offensive line, and I think that's a big difference between this year's MSU edition versus years in 2010 and 2011. Is that angry MSU offensive lineman hating God still struck, but they had the depth to sort of push through that. We didn't see Travis Jackson in this game, and Connor Cruz had a great game, I thought. So, yeah, it was really nice to see, and it's kind of amazing that Brian Allen got some run this year, considering the depth on the offensive line. So I'm excited for him going forward.
Yeah, last 2 years the offensive line has been very good, and I think health and the subsequent depth has been a big reason for that. And they're going to lose a couple guys this year, but they'll be kind of in a similar situation next year as they were this year with some guys with some starting experience sliding in. So as we look forward to the bowl game, because there's no championship for MSU, got Ohio State and Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. Michigan State is simply waiting, and if Alabama beats Missouri in the SEC championship game, it is extremely likely that MSU will end up in the Rose Bowl. Now, if Wisconsin beats Ohio State, what did I say?
You said Rose Bowl.
Orange Bowl. I'm even looking at the word orange here. Okay, Orange Bowl in Miami, where MSU, I think MSU's first ever bowl game was in the Orange Bowl, and they lost to Auburn back in the 30s or something like that.
Sounds right.
But yeah, it's looking like Orange Bowl very likely. If Wisconsin beats Ohio State, you could get 3 Big Ten teams in those what are considered access bowls if Ohio State at least doesn't get blown out with Cardale Jones at quarterback. So if you're looking at the Orange Bowl and say you play a team like Georgia Tech, how are you feeling about the relevance of that matchup instead of, say, a Citrus Bowl game against maybe a Mississippi State out of the SEC or something like that? Which do you think you'd prefer? Would you prefer the BCS type bowl against a non-SEC opponent, or would you prefer an SEC matchup in the lower bowl?
So this is the question of the 2012 bowl season, right after the 2011 season, where we ended up in the bowl game against Georgia, got passed over for the sugar.
Well, actually, you're right. It's kind of, well, you know what it is? MSU's kind of in the situation Michigan was in that chance, because MSU, after they lost to Wisconsin, They were not eligible for a BCS game. So
Right, they weren't ranked highly enough,
they
right?
couldn't because they fell too far after losing. And got in because they were eligible. They were benefited by not playing in that game. They were all guaranteed a BCS game by not playing. On the other hand, MSU and Wisconsin play, you win, you're in the Rose Bowl, you lose, you're out. Now MSU's the one sitting on the outside where they'll probably get in no matter who wins the Big Ten championship as long as Alabama wins it. I thought that's an interesting dynamic, actually, since you just brought it up. And in that case, they ended up in 2011. They did end up going to the Outback Bowl, where they obviously beat Georgia in a triple double overtime affair.
Yeah, it was triple. I think my line at the time was saying that I'd rather play Georgia than play Virginia Tech because Georgia was clearly a better team than Virginia Tech at the time.
Oh God, that game was so bad. The Michigan Tech game.
Sugar Bowl was so bad. Yeah,
that was like the worst BCS game I've ever seen.
So what I'm going to say is I would rather pick option C, which is I'd rather be in one of the New Year's Six games, but have it not be the Orange Bowl, have it be the Peach Bowl or the Cotton Bowl, and play against a team like an SEC team or another one of those top teams like the Cotton Bowl against TCU or something would be a really cool matchup. That wouldn't happen probably since we played them recently. But the Peach Bowl against an SEC school, that would be cool.
Okay, but you're okay. But pick one of the two. Obviously, a good bowl against a good matchup would be what anybody would prefer, I think. If you had to pick between the two, what means more to you, the matchup or the prestige of the bowl?
That's a really hard question because
exactly.
I think I might reverse.
That's why I'm asking it. This is what we do here on the Only Podcast. We answer the tough questions, or we at least ask them.
So I think I would go with going to the Orange Bowl just because it's been so infrequent that MSU has gotten to a bowl of that prestige level. I think that we've shown that we can hang with those SEC teams in lower bowls even when that happens. But to be able to buy that Orange Bowl shirt, I think would be something that would be pretty cool. And Georgia Tech seems like a pretty solid team. They're obviously no SEC West team, but I think I'm going to go with the prestige of the bowl, despite the fact that in previous years I said that playing a pretty good SEC team in a lower tier bowl was preferable. But what do you think?
No, to me it's about the prestige of the bowl, and it affects the perception of the program. And it's interesting because this has been an interesting year watching MSU in the rankings because they are only where they are because of their perception, because of their prestige. And it's a situation MSU hasn't been in maybe forever, unless you're going to go back to the 60s. MSU started as a top 10 team, and I think they've been a top 10 team, or maybe they've been a top 15 team all season long, despite only having one win of note, and that was a Nebraska game that they could have lost on the final drive with the way that game played out. After the loss to Ohio State, I believe they were about around the top 10, right outside the top 10 after that. Yet they had only beaten one team with a winning record. Now, since they added Maryland, Rutgers, and Penn State, they have 4 wins over bowl-eligible teams, none of which are really all that notable. So MSU being the highest-ranked 2-loss team in the polls, they're behind Arizona in the college football playoff rankings, but they're ahead of Arizona in the polls, while Arizona has wins over Arizona State and Oregon. And it's been interesting because MSU they're where they're at because of where they were in the preseason, something that MSU fans used to rag on other teams about all the time because MSU wasn't a name brand. They didn't get the benefit of the doubt, like last year when it took them forever to move up the polls, or even in 2011 when they kind of had to work their way back up. MSU is a top 10 team solely based on its perception, not at all based on its resume. And I think MSU getting into a Power Access Bowl pretty much based on its reputation is still a positive step for the program, because that means you're getting that recognition and respect that the program has been built on achieving. So whatever the matchup would be, I think it'd be very good for MSU to get into another BCS type bowl. That'd be 2 straight years of BCS type bowls, and if Connor Cook were to come back next year, you're maybe another. If you win that game and Connor Cook comes back, maybe you're a top 5 team again preseason, and Oregon coming to East Lansing, and you've got another top 5 showdown. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch this year, as MSU has pretty much been riding on the success of last year. Not to say that this isn't one of the 10 or so best teams, but when you're looking at what they've actually accomplished, it's not that much at all.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing has been the TV slots that MSU has gotten into, like having the 3:30 slot against Penn State, and having that be on ABC instead of on Big Ten Network, where Minnesota-Wisconsin, which was actually a relevant game.
That was unbelievable. I couldn't believe
BTN
got that game.
Yeah, that was amazing. So, yeah, you're right, though. It's, MSU football is really becoming known as a brand to a certain extent, which is totally amazing. But, yeah, I think I agree with you. The other thing about going to the Orange Bowl and playing Georgia Tech is that a win would probably be more likely. And winning the bowl game, regardless of where it's at, seems a little more important than who you played. I mean, if you end up playing Georgia or Alabama in a game and lose, then that's a lot less awesome.
You win that game, it helps your preseason ranking for next year, which was a big key for MSU this year. And so
absolutely,
it plays into itself.
And that schedule next year is going to be a lot of fun, because we start out at Western on a Friday night.
We can talk about that later sometime. It's going to be
sure.
They have a sneakily very difficult non-conference schedule.
Yeah, I agree with that.
At Western, which finished with 9 wins this year, I think.
They're 8-4.
Eight wins.
Yeah.
Then they've got Oregon at home. They've got Air Force, which is another 8-9 win team, and what is the other one? Central, who is bowl eligible. So that's 4 bowl eligible teams out of your non-conference. So they got a real tough. They got a real tough schedule next year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
As we close up on football here, a couple thoughts on Michigan. Obviously, Nebraska has since. Oh, actually, we can talk about this too. Nebraska hiring Mike Riley. You have any thoughts on that? Really, really came out of nowhere today, or Thursday, depending on when you're listening to this.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing, and I sort of had to get this out of my head too, is that if you're considering Mike Riley versus Bo Pelini, then the whole process doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you think of Bo Pelini as sort of sunk cost, like they already got rid of him, so now that they're rid of him, it's not like you have to hire a guy that's necessarily better. I mean, if you think about the process as a whole, it would make more sense that way. But once Pelini's gone, and who knows exactly why, right? There have to be, they were fed up with the way that he was talking about the fans. He probably, riled up somebody in the administration. So, but once he's gone and you're looking at the guys that you have available to you, I mean, Mike Riley is not the worst. You could, it's better than paying $7 million to get McElwain from Colorado State. So I think, Oregon State is a sort of a difficult program probably to be a part of, just because there's not a whole lot of, it's not a talent-rich area, and you're competing against Oregon. So, I mean, it's probably not as bad on its face, just like Mike Riley as a guy, but to fire Bo Pelini to hire him doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a process in some.
Well, based on other rumblings and reports, Nebraska was interested in Brett Bielema, which I think would have been a great hire.
I agree.
They reportedly met with Kyle Whittingham, which I think would have been a very good hire. I think when you get to Mike Riley, I think it's a very safe pick, and safe in the sense that you're not going to fall off. You're gonna be consistently pretty good, but that's sort of the whole reason they fired Bo Pelini in the first place. I mean, I know his personality didn't come off great to everybody, and between him and Mike Riley, it's very different. But when they had the whole press conference when they let Pelini go, the whole thing was we need to compete for championships. We need to play better in the big games. And I don't know if Mike Riley will be able to do that. He's a guy who's always done more with less, but he's never. I think he got he might have gotten to a BCS game with Oregon State. Was he the coach that year? I'm not sure, but they've missed a bowl game I think in 3 of the last 5 years at Oregon State. So it's not like he's been doing wonders over the past 5 years. So it feels like a safe pick. It feels like a pick that'll win them 8-9 games a year, which is the exact same situation they're in. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, though, because he does a very good job with evaluating players, and so we'll see where that goes. At Michigan, I get the sense this is a search that's going to take quite a while because you've got an inexperienced interim AD and an inexperienced president, and if they wanted to go after Jim Harbaugh, that's going to have to take some time with the NFL season. So I think it's going to take some time. If they need to get this one right, because it's been a decade without a Big Ten championship for them now, and that's virtually unheard of for Michigan. And I think they'll take their time and really try to get this one right. And could go a lot of different ways. Les Miles is a name that's always thrown in there. I know Greg Schiano, formerly of Rutgers, would not excite the fan base off the bat, but he's done well at Rutgers. We've got the Harbaughs there, and Colin Cowherd's mystery candidate.
That was strange, right? Like that report was very odd.
They could go a lot of different ways, and I think it'll take them a little bit of time to figure out exactly what they want to do. A guy who I think would do really well there, I don't know if he'll get in the mix or not, is Mississippi State's Dan Mullen, an offensive guy who's built a really solid program in Mississippi State that obviously went over the top this year.
Yeah, it looks like Mullen has some Midwestern connections, which is helpful. That's going to be really interesting to see sort of how Michigan approaches the search, because to me, and this seemed to have happened at Nebraska as well, is that what happens is teams tend to sort of go for the polar opposite of their previous hire. So, after the Rich Rodriguez hire at U of M, they went for Brady Hoke, who was a Michigan man. And then in Nebraska, after Bo Pelini, who riled people up, is out, now they go after Mike Riley, who's more of a nice guy, somebody who's not going to, bother the fan base or the administration. So, and I think in some cases that makes sense, and I think in other cases it's a little bit of an overreaction to what was happening previously at that school. So I don't know if they'll go with like a coordinator who has some, particular tactical expertise, or which is sort of the opposite of Brady Hoke.
I can't see Michigan hiring a first-time head coach. I think that would be too risky for them. Florida did it, Nebraska did it, and both of them are now looking for new head coaches here for different reasons. But I think they've got to get a guy who's proven he can win big, at least somewhere. Mullen hasn't won big, but he did get to number one for quite a bit this year once team. But a lot of ways they could go. Any final thoughts on Michigan?
No, I think that's about it. I just hope they stay away from it. In that case, what you just said makes me excited, because then we can cross them off of the list of potential Pat Narduzzi suitors. But
yeah, I cannot see Michigan hiring Pat Narduzzi. That's nothing against Narduzzi. I just think Michigan's a job in a situation right now where they need to get a guy who has shown he can win. It's an interesting spot for Narduzzi because at first the jobs that came open, Florida, Nebraska, Michigan, are all major jobs. There were big jobs open and there were small jobs open. There weren't middle to middle high jobs, which was where I think Narduzzi would land. And now as these dominoes are going to kind of start to fall once guys take other jobs. It'll be interesting to see what comes open, and if Narduzzi takes a look at it. Because I know someone brought him up for State, but that's not a Power 5 job. I know they're 10-2 this year, and Jim McElwain turned that into the Florida job, so it could be something he could consider.
Yeah, after turning down UConn, though, I'm not sure that Colorado State would be...
UConn was one of the worst Power 5 deals. That team was in a bad spot. Whoever takes over Colorado State's taking over the a 10-2 team, although they are going to lose their quarterback, I believe. So, yeah. But moving on now to the sport of shooty hoops, down to basketball, which I still have not quite fully mentally checked into. But after a encouraging start to the season for MSU, they start off 5-1 with a decent performance against Duke and a loss. They have now lost back-to-back games, one to Kansas in Orlando by 5, and at Notre Dame by 1 in overtime, which was only 1 point because of a last-second shot. But back-to-back losses and back-to-back really, really questionable play in the final minutes of the game. Joe, what are you looking at? What are your thoughts on where this team is sitting right now?
So I wrote a little bit of a pessimistic recap for that Notre Dame game, but
yeah, read it, plug it on the site. Yeah, we're plugging the site because you're on the site listening to this probably. So when this is done, or if you want to open it in a new tab, go read that while you're listening to this.
Absolutely. So I think that my pessimism immediately following the game might have been a little overstated. I'm just concerned because there seem to be issues that are opponent dependent, right? We couldn't rebound against Kansas, and there were also issues in just making layups, right? And then against Notre Dame, it seemed like the defensive rotations were totally off. So I'd like to see some more consistency. I guess that was sort of expected from this team, though. It's an inexperienced team. It's a team that needs some time to gel, probably. It's concerning to me that Marvin Clark only played 4 minutes last night. I think some of that had to do, I'm not sure if he's sick, maybe some of it had to do with a stretch during that Kansas game where he sort of shot too much. So I'm no longer as cautiously optimistic as I was. I thought the way that the team was sort of whipping the ball around the court, getting some really open shots for some outside shooters was great. But it's not a deep enough team to sort of be consistently at that level all the time. And it's just concerning. I think that the Big Ten is loaded in terms of teams that are pretty good at that Notre Dame type level. And so the conference schedule is going to be rough. And if they aren't able to sort of pull the team together and get healthier, it could be a bubble team. And having that extra 4 teams that get in, or 3 teams that get in now, will be helpful. But it's my expectations are reset to a certain extent. I was thinking it would be sort of, a team that was for sure in the tournament. Could, if all the right things happened, surprise a couple teams during that Big Ten season, win a game against Kansas here in the non-conference. But I think this is mostly going to be holding on to our pants until Selection Sunday type team.
Yeah, I think after Kansas it was they make their layups, they probably win that game, and I think that was true. But then you lose to Notre Dame, and all of a sudden you're not going to have a top 100 win in non-conference play unless Marquette were to move up there at 103 right now. But in the Ken Palmer 2001-2002 season, MSU has never gone into Big Ten play without at least one top 100 non-conference win, and that's likely not going to happen this time. So they're going to have to make up ground in Big Ten play like they've never had to do before. Even that 2004 team that played an incredibly rough schedule and for turning around a Big Ten play. They still had 2 top 100 wins that year, non-conference, going into Big Ten play. You mentioned how streaky, inconsistent this team is, and I think it's partly how they're built, and that's to shoot jumpers. When you shoot so many jumpers, let me look at this here. 36.7% of MSU's shots are threes, which is number 117 in the country. What was it a year ago? Let me take a look here.
I think
was actually it was higher, but this isn't as good. This isn't as talented as a team as last year. They've made a lot of their 3-pointers, but you're going to get a good run, and then you're going to really cool off. So at times this team has looked better than we thought, and at times they've looked as bad as we thought. And when this team is number 341 in the country in getting to the free throw line, that's almost dead last. You know you're not getting to the hoop very much at all, and I don't know if that's going to change, because neither Trice nor Valentine are much of the drivers that top shape Keith Appling was able to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of stuff in there. One is, if you look at what the potential tournament resume for MSU looks like at the end of the year, and all of the quality wins are going to have to come against Big Ten teams. Unless all of a sudden Eastern is 7-0, but they don't really play anybody anyways. That's probably the next best chance for a win that is halfway decent. That's pretty rough when you're banking on Eastern to do anything for your resume. And so that's pretty rough. The other thing is, you're right, but that seems like part of the offense, and that's happened over the last few years, even when there were guys who could drive to the rim, like a Gary Harris. MSU still ranked poorly in that free throw rate category. It just doesn't seem like it's something that Izzo is really all that interested in implementing into regular sets. And speaking of sets, it was really difficult to watch this team at the end of the second half and in overtime run offense. I don't know how Bryn Forbes doesn't get a look.
Yeah, I don't think he took a shot after the first half, if I recall correctly. And he was 7 for 7.
And I mean, Trice was sick, so it made sense that Valentine was initiating offense. But at the same time, it was just a real slog. And you can say this about basically any team, but especially teams that are jumper heavy. If they're not making shots, then it's really hard to watch, because you just see guys taking long twos, step back threes. I mean, without those 2 insane 3-pointers from Valentine, and then also the 3 free throws that he got on a questionable foul call, that game does not go into overtime. It's not as close as it was in overtime. So even a 1-point loss was a little on the lucky side, I would say, of average. Yeah, I don't know where this team goes. There's really no identity to it. It's not like MSU got out-rebounded against Kansas pretty badly, and then couldn't play any defense against Notre Dame. Give Notre Dame some credit there for actually running set offense, which was opening up some stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. At times, they were in overtime. They weren't running anything. It was all on both sides. It was all hero ball. It felt like I didn't know what either team was doing in overtime. Who do you think is the go-to guy going forward here? I think it has to be Trice, but he admittedly was apparently pretty sick. Hashtag excuses. And he really struggled against Notre Dame, but I still think late in the shot clock, late in the game clock, Trice is the guy I want to have the ball, not a guy like Valentine, who I know dribbling off his foot is kind of accidental, but he still hasn't shown a guy who can truly run the offense, or if he's going to take it and actually make a move, he's just going to try to pull up and shoot a 3, which he admittedly has been making a lot more this year, but I think Trice has to be that go-to guy.
Yeah, I would agree.
You think it's got to be Trice?
I would agree with that, and I think there's a couple reasons for that, right? One thing you have to sort of guarantee in a late game situation is that you at least get a shot off. A turnover in a situation like that is disaster. And Trice has done a very good job of taking care of the ball, which is something that Valentine has always had issues with.
We knew they weren't going to get a shot off at the end of regulation there before he dribbled it off his foot. Whether it be the clock run out or a turnover, you just had the sense that it was going to happen. It felt like Keith Appling getting the ball stolen from Trey Burke a couple years back. MSU's late clock plays for a few years now out of bounds have been not good.
So this is a whole nother rant, but which makes you wonder why exactly we don't try to go for 2-for-1 more often.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I think it's got to be Trice. The other thing about that is Dawson just is not hitting those jumpers, and so that's the other option I think you could sort of maybe go for. But I think Dawson's main utility on the offensive end is mostly in offensive rebounding. I tweeted this out during that Notre Dame game, but I thought the main issue with Dawson taking those fall away jumpers was that it made it that so he could not rebound the ball at that point. Exactly. I mean, he can just be totally dominant on the offensive glass when he decides to be. So yeah, I mean that would be my Trice handling the ball with Forbes and Valentine able to shoot, and then Schilling and Dawson looking to clean up the boards. I think is sort of the ideal late game situation. If you have to go with an ISO, I prefer to run a shot to get Bryn Forbes open, but oh well.
Yeah. Speaking of Forbes, reasons for optimism moving forward. You figure Alvin Ellis is healthy and playing again. Javon Bess they're hoping he's going to get back soon. Bryn Forbes is getting a smaller and smaller cast on, and he was very good in that Notre Dame game. I know they don't have the next few weeks. They don't have much chance for notable wins, but in terms of overall team play, when you look at put a string of home wins together in dominating fashion, are a possibility. Do you see reasons for optimism moving forward?
Yeah, and one that you didn't mention there was Gavin Schilling. I think is just night and day from last year.
I was going to mention him too.
Yeah, I think he's moved past Costello in the pecking order in terms of bigs. Yeah, I would agree with all of those things. The thing that's amazing to me is that Javon Bess was singled out preseason as being the most impressive freshman, and I think that Marvin Clark, up until only playing 4 minutes last night, had been really impressive, doing a pretty decent Dawson impersonation, except with the jumper, not rebounding quite as well. So yeah, Bess is an exciting guy. It was nice to see Ellis play a little bit, at least get some run in. And he's a guy that could maybe improve some of the defensive rotation issues because he's been in the system longer. So you got to figure Forbes is sort of like a freshman in the sense that this is his first year at MSU. So there are all these new guys and guys taking on new roles. You could use the Izzoism of we're playing weird guys at all times at this point. So yeah, I think as this team gets more experience in playing together, that will help, especially with it's really important. Ball movement is so important in this offense. It seems like that with more time playing together, that can only improve.
Yeah, my computer's about to die down here soon. Who do you got in the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State or Wisconsin?
I'm gonna go Ohio State. I think that Cardale Jones, even though he's not there to play school, can pull it out for them. I think that he was in a competition with JT Barrett, and I think that he's going to be pretty solid for them anyways.
I'm going Wisconsin. I was actually sort of starting to lean Wisconsin before the Barrett injury. I think Ohio State's run defense hasn't been all that great recently. Langford ran up and down on them. Even Michigan was moving the ball on the ground pretty good for a little bit there. I'm actually going to go with Wisconsin because of what they can do. So that's going to wrap it up here. Make sure you're checking out everything we got at theonlycolors.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Vanini and Joe over at Jobin2E. And for Joe, this is Chris Vanini, and thanks for listening, and take care, everybody.